Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So good. We're going to go ahead and get started. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilma. Alhamdulillah, Ibrahim, good to have you with us. Um, we begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we send peace and blessings upon our final messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. As we begin the 11th time we are together for story night, discussing the story of Musa alayhi salam as it's found in various parts of the Quran. So far, we've had 4 different surahs that we've jumped through in terms of different kind of renditions of the same part of the story of Musa alayhi salam and different components of the story of Musa alayhi salam. And currently, what we have been doing is discussing the story of Musa alayhi salam as it is found specifically in Surah Al-Shu'ara. I forgot which chapter of the Quran it is, but Surah Al-Shu'ara. Last week, after having a week in which we discussed characteristics of Fir'aun more specifically, we started getting into the conversation that Musa alayhi salam first had with Fir'aun. And now I'm going to share my screen. Where are we? So as we now get into the story, I'm hoping you guys can both see the screen now and Zoom. Is that correct? Yay, I finally figured this out. So now we're gonna do a quick review of what we learned. That Musa alayhi salam, again, he went up to Fir'aun because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to, not because he wanted to have this conversation, but because to have the conversation is actually going to lead to 2 things. One is people getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and people being corrected in how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and 2, to stop oppression. That's the reason he confronts Fir'aun. I actually had a few of you ask me some interesting questions related to how to confront a pharaoh or a Fir'aun in each of our lives and how to go about doing that. And I thought they were super relevant, so I'm going to share them with the bigger group. I had one of you ask the question, well, how do you know when you're confronting a Fir'aun based on your ego, or you're confronting a Fir'aun that actually needs to be toppled down? And I thought that was a very, very well put together question, because there are times in which you challenge authority figures for the sake of challenging authority figures, not because they are necessarily a tyrant or causing corruption in any way, shape, or form. And this is where I have to go back to Musa alayhi salam didn't go to Fir'aun to take revenge on him. He could have. Let me be abundantly clear. He could have. That would be enough reason, and that would be quote unquote justified for him to go and confront Fir'aun. Why? Because you're oppressing me and my people. You nearly killed me when I was a child. And there's so much that could be kind of brought in here. That's not why he goes. It's not until he gets called by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he goes and actually confronts Fir'aun. And what I'm trying to say here is that it's not that that motivation isn't enough, a personal motivation, but it becomes more significant, and you're able to actually separate between you and your own kind of ego and others when there is a call that comes in. And this oftentimes requires a couple of things. One, of course, is a good connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which the prophets alayhim salam all had. So this doesn't mean that's going to happen to us necessarily. I don't think we're going to see a burning bush and suddenly be told to remember who you are and go to Fir'aun because he's been oppressing people. But this does happen in terms of maybe a moral awakening because you read something, that something just keeps sticking to your mind. There are ayat that are constantly something that's attentive to you. That type of thing can happen, and that would be a moment to sometimes confront an actual issue. And if we want to use the prophetic example isn't, okay, I got the excuse to go, now I'm going to rush. No, it's actually, can I really do this? That degree of discernment that Musa alayhi salam goes through is actually, I would argue, a very healthy form of response to confronting a Fir'aun. It is not a negative thing to do. It is a positive thing to do. I think that's something for all of us to do as well. Am I the right messenger? Do I have the right message? To question that, that's actually going to be a component of why you would be the most appropriate person to confront a Fir'aun, not that would be a disqualifier, because it shouldn't be someone who's self-righteous. If anything, it should be someone who's self-reflective. It should be someone who thinks, I'm not the greatest person to take on this task, but I'm going to because it's the greater good. And why that's important is if that's not the case, it could be one Fir'aun taking down another Fir'aun. And history is full of lessons like that, where one tyrant was deposed by another tyrant. How that gets stopped is actually the approach of, well, one had a group behind them, had a mission behind them, had a people that they're trying to serve, rather than trying to just replace the one who's causing the oppression. So thought that was a very interesting question that I wanted to make sure to incorporate today. But going back to the story at hand, there was one more which I'll get into once we start diving a little bit deeper into our review. Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam, they both go together. They talk to Fir'aun, and last week we got into, they came up to him and they said, "Inna rasulu rabbil alameen." We are messengers from the Lord of the worlds. And that's not it. They stayed stuck to message, which was, one, we're here to correct the theology. We're messengers on behalf of the Lord of the worlds. And two, an arsil ma'ana bani Israel, and send back with us the children of Israel. So stop your oppression. You've been oppressing these people for generations. It's time to stop your oppression. And Fir'aun, remember what he does is he doesn't want to address the actual point. So he attacks the messenger because he can't contend with the message. Does this sound familiar? There are so many times in which someone who wants to take down an argument will do an ad hominem attack, which is what? Instead of trying to address the issue at hand, they'll take, who are you to say this to me? Will be what's said instead. They'll try to put you in your place, is a typical attack that's put forward. And even it's done oftentimes to the tradition of Islam in general, where who's attacked? The Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They try to attack the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Do you know who your prophet was? And they start putting all these random accusations, which are terrible and easy to debunk, but still they start doing that, attacking the messenger. And Fir'aun does just that. أَلَمْ نُرَبِّكَ فِينَا وَلِيدًا وَلَبِثْتَ فِينَا مِنْ عُمُرِكَ سِنِينَ. Didn't you spend like your childhood with us? We raised you as a child and you remained with us for the most pivotal years of your life. So he's trying to remind him, I did you a solid back then, didn't I? And you're going to come here and try to demand something of me right now? Not only that, but he also says, فَعَلْتَ فَعَلْتَكَ الَّتِي فَعَلْتَ وَأَنْتَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And you did that thing that you did. You remember that thing? Yeah, and you were so ungrateful, by the way, for what happened. And remember, we saw about that the irony of Fir'aun calling Musa alayhi salam a kafir. It's such a weird situation to be in. But this is also another technique of Fir'aun, which is to talk about not who you are right now, but who you were in the past. Why I wanted us to really pay attention to this last week is this is going to be a lesson in this is a conversation that didn't just happen between Musa and Fir'aun. It happens all the time. I would make the argument that it's happening in any situation where someone in power is communicating with someone without power. The person in power is saying, I don't care about who you are right now. You know who I care about? You know that time you messed up? Yeah, that's who I'm going to bring up. Sometimes we find ourselves in that scenario in which someone can't see past our mistake. Someone only sees us when we were a child, when we did make a mistake, whatever the case may be. That's a Fir'aunic quality. And we got to be careful when it comes to when someone is talking to us, how we see them. Are we seeing the person in front of us and actually having a conversation about those thoughts? Or are we belittling them by some version of them in the past that they themselves are not very proud of? It's important. I can't tell you how many times in which a parent-child relationship will be just this, that a parent will be looking at a child and they won't appreciate the young man or woman who's sitting before them. They will just think about, no, you made a terrible decision back then. And based on that, I will not actually talk with you anymore. And to be fair, I've seen this on the other front as well. There are certain times in which the pharaoh in the scenario is not the parent, even though the power dynamic seems to be that way. Sometimes it's the child who's doing that to the parent. Or sometimes people are legitimately trying to change. And you're like, no, you hurt me too bad. I'm going to only judge you based on who you were, not based on who you are. We have to be careful. These are conversations in the Quran because they're constantly happening. That power, when it addresses non-power, what does it try to do? It tries to actually keep its position by reminding people of past mistakes. And we focused on that last week. That's what Fir'aun tries to do, try to get him completely off point. Musa alayhi salam, he sees him in front of him. He's like, this is not the same Musa that used to live in this house. This is a confident man who's making demands and seems to know his purpose in life. And he sees this in front of him. He's like, let me try to throw him off, because that's just what Fir'aun does. Fir'aun is not powerful because he himself is powerful. He's powerful because he can take down everyone around him really, really well. And Musa alayhi salam, masterclass in conversation, like we talked about last week. قال فألتها إذا وأنا من الضالين. I did it when I was amongst those that was astray. Admits the mistake straight up, does not try to justify it, doesn't do anything. I did. That was me in the past, but that is not me right now. ففررت منكم لما خفتكم فوهب لي ربي حكما وجعلني من المرسلين. And actually, I fled from you because I used to be afraid of you. When he says I used to be afraid of you, what does that also mean? I'm not afraid of you anymore. And my Lord then granted me judgment or wisdom. Hukman is actually what's found here. He granted me the ability of discerning what is actually right from wrong. I didn't last time when I was young, I used to think the only things that were right was what? Well, the things you said were right. Now I know what's actually right. My Lord granted it for me. وَجَعَلْنِي مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, and made me a messenger. Musa alayhi salam returns to the same conversation he started with, which was what? We're messengers sent from Allah, Rabbul Alameen. So he goes right back to the message. He doesn't get distracted by Fir'aun's tangents. And then the second part of what's the other message that Musa had to say, which was, we're messengers from Rabbul Alameen, and the second one is, let Bani Israel go. وَتِلْكَ نِعْمَةٌ تَمُنُّهَا عَلَيَّ وَعَبَّدْتَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. And this favor, which I admit to you that I was grateful for you for raising me. But this favor which you remind me of, are you saying because you raised me that you're supposed to be enslaving Bani Israel? So again, going right back to the main message of what he started with, which is, I'm here to stop the oppression of Bani Israel. Pharaoh probably recognizing this in this moment, I can't throw him off. I can't. I tried. It didn't work. Now he says, قَالَ فِرْعَوْنُ وَمَا رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. And then Fir'aun said, and what is this Lord of the world? So he finally addresses Musa alayhi salam's actual question. Allah didn't capture those ayat to waste for no purpose, because that's what people will try to do when they have qualities of Fir'aun, try to throw you off based on mistakes, throw ad hominem attacks at you. What our lessons are supposed to be is address them. Don't just completely ignore them. Musa alayhi salam address them, but address them without losing confidence and without losing his actual message. Unfortunately, what happens to most of us when we're given those things, our personal stakes come through, our insecurities shine through, and what? Our message loses all of its steam. You might have had the best points ever, but when someone insults your maturity, when someone insults, insert whatever, your eloquence, someone insults, brings up something from your past, we get so distracted that we lose the ability of actually having the conversation at hand. Musa alayhi salam is able to, of course, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, this conversation, we even started this. Allah says that we were mustami'un, we were listening to this conversation as Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun were having, and we were with Musa alayhi salam. So Allah was inspiring Musa alayhi salam to respond in the best of manners. But he sticks to point so that Fir'aun actually has to address him, and we'll see the result of what happens as a result of that later as we continue the conversation today. I'm almost done with my review. And Musa alayhi salam responds, قَالَ رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. This is what he actually came to do, is to tell people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. They're even in a place like the court of Fir'aun, there are opportunities to actually talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا, and whatever is in between them. إِن كُنتُم مُوقِنِينَ. If you were to be convinced, Qin would be muqinin. I would translate is a bit more than just kind of being convinced. Like if we look at the translation here and we look at where else it's found in the Quran, by the way, highly recommend this app, Quran Works, for kind of understanding sometimes the root words and what's being put on there. It would be kind of if you were to really deeply look into something, or if you were to see the differentiation, like subtly look at something. If you look at anything in the heavens and anything in the earth, you'll actually start finding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's in control of everything. Rather than anyone else who claims that they are, they won't be able to explain to you how the heavens work or how the earth works or what is in between them. Why this is especially relevant to Fir'aun is if we look historically as to why the pharaohs were relevant in Egypt, they could tell the people when the Nile would flood and when it would recede. That's actually where they got their power from. Because what did they do? They actually calculated the lunar cycle. And they're like, aha. And so much of the Egyptian way of life depended on the flooding and the regression of the Nile that they're like, this guy must have divine knowledge somehow. So based on that one thing of power, using it to exalt themselves over the people. And this is something that gets challenged here is like, how much knowledge do you really have over everything? You know one thing. Can you tell me why they flood? No. Can you tell me what slight changes there will be? No. It's the idea of like just utilizing one piece of knowledge over anything else. Musa is bringing that to the attention of the people. And then Fir'aun realizes as this is happening that he's like, oh snap, this is damaging my brand. قال لمن حوله ألا تستمعون. He calls all of the people around him because he's realizing I can't take Moses on head on. Remember, he didn't even try to diffuse Musa Islam's argument. He just says, I can't take him on head on. Let me involve my court. Another strategy of bullies. They can't actually like hold their own in the debate. So what? Let's try to use ridicule of the people around us. Like I already know that I have yes men all around me. So he goes, do you guys not hear what he's saying? Do all of you hear what he's saying? قال ربكم ورب آبائكم الأولين. And Musa alayhi salam, as he's doing that, says, actually it's the Lord, your Lord, and the Lord of your forefathers. Like all of them actually believed in this Lord. So Musa alayhi salam continues to talk, and Fir'aun then says, قال إن رسولكم الذي أرسل إليكم لمجنون. This messenger that's been sent to you, he's a complete madman. Is he saying this to Musa alayhi salam? No, of course not, because he's given up talking to Musa alayhi salam because he's realized he's out of his league. He has no argument for him. So instead, he starts talking to the people around him because this is the court of Fir'aun. This would be in the pyramid office. Like, I don't know if that's actually a thing, but you get my point. Like, this is in his royal court. So he's trying to convince them now. Don't listen to him. He's mad. He's trying to take him down because he's like, he knows he's losing ground in this moment. And then Musa Islam continues. قال رب المشرق والمغرب وما بينهما إن كنتم تعقلون. The Lord of the East and the West and whatever is between them. If you were only to reason, to think. And the people are probably thinking like, you know, yes, this is a different setting than the Mage Showdown. That'll happen a little bit later. The people are probably thinking, Pharaoh never tells us to think. He never gives us examples. You know what he does? He just tells us what to think. This guy is telling us that we need to think for ourselves and we can see the signs because we were always told he sees the signs and he tells us what the signs are. He's telling us to actually look at the signs for ourselves. This is probably ringing a bell with all of the people there. So Fir'aun once again jumps and says, قال لئن اتخذت إلها غيري لأجعلنك من المسجونين. If you take a god other than me, I'll imprison all of you. So who sounds like they're winning the argument right now? The guy who's actually speaking on point for what he came here to say, or the other guy who's now threatening? And who is he threatening? The royal court around him. If any of you keep listening to him and are convinced by his arguments, I will imprison all of you. The power dynamic has shifted completely. Fir'aun went from being on the attack against Musa alayhi salam to now attacking his own people. This first conversation, and this is why I think it's important for us to understand the Quranic version of this. Any of you who've ever seen like the Ten Commandments or the like Prince of Egypt or any of these other portrayals, it makes it seem like Pharaoh was completely in control of the first conversation with Musa, and he almost like scrubs him off as nothing. The Quranic version is Pharaoh was scared. He was freaked out. He tried his bullying tactics, they didn't work. He tried to call his own reputation up, didn't work. So he had to resort to what? Threatening his staff. Don't listen to him. He lost the conversation. Musa alayhi salam went from a total stranger to these people, an exile even, to Pharaoh's afraid of him. And they all saw it. They're all like, this guy is able to take on our king, able to take on, in their eyes, for some of them, our God, and completely treats him like he's scared and he's worried. This has never happened before. So they're actually really scared in this moment. Sorry, I've been talking for a long time. I wanted to get through at least the review and present it in a way that are slightly different than last time. Any thoughts or reflections before we continue? Because then Pharaoh is going to respond to like, I need to do damage control, and he figures out a way to do damage control. But what he doesn't realize is his way of doing damage control actually digs his problem and digs the hole that he's in much deeper. But any questions or comments before we continue, or reflections? This is from Surah Shu'ara.
I have one like kind of reflection I made, and I think when you're going over the review, and I think ayah number 21,
Mhm.
which was let me scroll up, sorry. Yeah, this ayah where I just pictured, I don't know, for that moment, for a hot second, I like pictured myself as Musa alayhi salam and the Pharaoh at the same time, as to like, there's always this thing where like I feel like everyone faces that, not running away from their past, but like, letting the past kind of get to you, like how you used to be, and always questioning your ability now.
Mhm.
And um and then like you always question yourself whether like you're actually worthy enough to be where you are right now, or like or did you truly change as a person. And when you think that, you kind of fall back and like start being scared again. But the part where Musa alayhi salam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gave him strength. I feel like the part of my brain that says like you don't belong here, or like you're not good enough, the wisdom, not the wisdom, but the knowledge that I get from like, just Islam in general, I can use that to back up myself. Like, no, stop questioning yourself. You are good. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't know. I feel like I pictured myself as both in that I am.
I really appreciate you sharing that for a couple of different reasons. And one is, yes, because we need to, like, we have imposter syndrome. Did I really change? Did I not change? And you start questioning whether there has been any real change. But if you were like, no, I was motivated by what? By the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, I attribute it all to Allah. Like, this has led me to what? Be more grateful. This has led me to recognize my Lord more. That in and of itself gives you confidence. So that's awesome. But the other reason this reflection spoke to me is, um, I'm very uncomfortable with some of the language around self-love, because it starts turning into self-worship. Like, people start talking about like your higher self, and like there's all of this talk about the self without there being a conversation about, like, the Muslim approach to this would be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who caused this. God called me. God is taking care of me. Not you, I am taking care of myself. I am. There's not so much I language. It's actually, even effectively, if you replace the I with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're not feeding even your ego in some way. You're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is causing me to be in a state of being in a higher sense of judgment, and made me amongst the ones who kind of put me on righteousness in this way. Again, I find this humility that's associated with it, which is, at least to me, way more palatable than sometimes like self-love language. I'm not saying that there's no good in self-love. I think there's a lot of good to be had, that we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to be able to give ourselves gratitude and forgiveness in that way. But when we add Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to it, it allows you to address that same matter without the guise of arrogance that's sometimes behind it. Sarah, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask this question. on Friday last week because we were and you were talking about like the people of the cave and how like they were trying to look and see in like the practices of their society if they could find anything good in it. And
Mhm.
like the I was actually gonna ask like the whole like thing like obsession I guess nowadays with like taking time to yourself and like meditating and things like that. Um I understand your point where it's just like it can get to an extent where it's just like very like focused on yourself and like not necessarily recognizing that like you're not in control of every single thing. I was wondering if like do you have like a perspective on how you kind of like take the good out of that practice?
Yeah. I what I see about taking the good is almost all of the practice itself, like what the techniques that would be used, take some time out, reflect, like spend some time in solitude, write a gratitude journal. All of those, almost the methods of it are pretty spot on. I don't think there's a problem with them. The goal is what I think is different. The goal is supposed to be in our tradition that you attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you appreciate Allah. While and when you do that, you get to know yourself more. I think the goal is what it needs to just be shifted. Rather than putting the attention on yourself, you put the attention on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But part of putting your attention on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so that you can appreciate you, because you are at the end of the day a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that would be the one slight difference I would take with the typical self-love approach or the typical kind of like self-help approach. Sorry, does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So I'm going to continue through now, inshallah. I believe we were on ayah number 29 when Fir'aun is like, all of you, I'm going to imprison you if you believe anything that he says, if you take a God other than me. Again, losing the argument pretty significantly. Oh, I didn't mention this. This will also be a characteristic, and we need to watch out if we do this. Someone is talking to us and we resort to threats rather than actual interlocking with the argument, we resort to threats. And also, when we stop caring about the person in front of us and we start caring about the crowd more, this is a problem. One of the reasons, so when we had this conversation at Soru a couple of weeks ago, where someone asked me my opinion on debates. Like, did you see how debate wasn't that awesome? And I'm like, I kind of feel like this happens in debates all the time, where one ad hominem attacks happen back and forth, like debaters attack each other, already problematic, and even more so, the who they are talking to is almost never the person in front of them. It's more about the crowd around them, and to me, that's not a good way of having a civil conversation. And people typically end up doing what? Being more convinced of their own positions or more fanboyish or fangirlish of the person who's speaking in that moment than they do about the actual arguments that are being presented. So like I'm not the biggest, so just so you know, I'm not the biggest fan of like a debating type of setting for that reason. And this is not what I would see it as happening here. Musa Isam is presenting his case, and Firaun is like, oh my gosh, my reputation is being tarnished and destroyed right now, even though I tried to do the exact same thing to him. Um, then Firaun finally says, okay, this guy's speaking. I need to get him to stop talking. So, قال فأتي به إن كنت من الصادقين. Actually, I really like this translation. Then bring it. That's actually a pretty good. If we wanted to translate, then bring proof in kuntum min as-sadiqin. Then bring some element of proof if you should be truthful. Even though I really like them, then bring it. Okay, if you should be truthful. And Musa alayhi salam, Pharaoh is thinking he's gonna like bring an army, bring proof, bring something. فألقى عصاه فإذا هي ثعبان مبين. So remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told Musa alayhi salam, you're going to have a couple of signs. One of them will be whatever skills, it was literally his staff. He threw it on the ground and it became a serpent. a clear serpent, meaning that like no one looked at that and said that's a stick with slightly serpent-like features. No one looked at it and said that. They're like, oh my gosh, that is a terrifying snake. And Thu'ban is used here, which would be like a really thick serpent. Versus it was not a Thu'ban when Musa alayhi salam, it was described to him. At that point, it was described as a regular snake. But so it's a different type of snake in this case. And Fir'aun and everyone is kind of looking at it and they're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And the other one, وَنَزَعَ يَدَهُ فَإِذَا هِيَ بَيْضَاءُ لِلنَّاظِرِينَ. And he drew out his hand and it was white for the observers. Now, I am not in any way suggesting that the stick did not turn into a serpent and that his hand did not turn completely white and glowing. Not what I am about to make the argument for. I believe that happened. And I think we should all have that appreciation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent messengers with signs that were relevant to the society that they existed in. This was a society that was really wowed by mythology, that was really wowed by things like shape shifting. If you do any study of ancient Egypt, what do you see is gods with animal heads and like shapeshifters and like light coming from darkness. There's a river of darkness that's talked about, and you go down this river when you die, and your light will be. So they have all of these symbols built into the ancient Egyptian tradition. So it only makes sense that the signs that Musa alayhi salam will be sent with will be extremely relevant to the people that he sent to. But I want us to also keep in mind that this is as much about Musa alayhi salam as it is about Musa alayhi salam presenting to the people. When Allah told Musa alayhi salam that, look at the stick that you have, Musa alayhi salam said, I have so many uses for it. I can hit leaves. I can tell my sheep where to go. I can lean on it when I'm tired. Allah was like, Musa alayhi salam was like, look, being a shepherd has been great. Look at what it taught me about this stick. Allah was like, I will use whatever you have and use it in a way that you couldn't even expect. I want us to think about this for a second. Who is the least intimidating person in a society? I would make the argument a shepherd boy. No one thinks a shepherd is going to do what? Challenge the military dictator who murders babies every now and then. No one believes that. Musa alayhi salam comes in with a shepherd's staff and goes to the greatest military power in the world and freaks him out with it. With what? The skills of a shepherd. The other thing is, they would think that to get some sort of training, it has to be, the Egyptians were big on pure blood. One of the reasons the Pharaoh was the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh has all of these things like if you ever study Egyptian history, like the pharaohs were the most inbred, weird, like genetics things ever. Like Cleopatra, a much later pharaoh, marries her brother, and like there's a lot of grossness that kind of goes on there because it's all about purity. Musa alayhi salam, by their accounts, would have been completely a corrupt of blood, corrupt of all of this. But guess what? The purest. If once he puts his hands on his heart, takes it out, purity is found within it. It was completely bayda, pure, linnadhirin, for anyone who looked at it. I'm presenting it as if they were actual miracles, but they were much more symbolic than I think we give them credit for. And we can't fully appreciate it because we're not a culture that values shape-shifting and these type of things. That wouldn't be something that impressed them like crazy, but I think they were also deeply symbolic in terms of what they held to the people inside. If that makes sense. I'm hoping I'm communicating this somehow effectively.
I have a small question.
Mm-hmm.
So the two signs that were shown were like the serpents and the white hand, right? And you did say that it was because that's how like the Egyptian society worked. Is there any other like symbolic reasons as to why it's specifically the white hand, like what the white hand may have meant and what the serpents may have meant specifically?
To me, the whiteness of Musa alayhi salam's hand, or white, I hesitate to use the term whiteness. I'm literally translating it, but the purity of his hand, like the opaqueness of it, has to do with Musa alayhi salam. Remember, what did he do with his hand that he felt really guilty about? He punched the guy and the dude died. So he's thinking my hand is what? Tainted. It has sinned. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows him to be like, it's pure. To me, that is another major element of it. And because I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, this was a miracle given to Musa, so it was effective to him. The first person that was affected by the miracle was not Fir'aun. The first person who was affected by the miracle was Musa alayhi salam, because he needed it. He felt like, I could imagine Musa alayhi salam, and I'm doing a little bit of conjecture here. I could imagine that he's like, I was raised to be a prince of Egypt, and now all I have is to be a shepherd. And Allah's like, that shepherding experience that you have, it'll terrify even the world power of the time. I could have done so much, but I ended up what? Carrying the psychological trauma of punching and killing a man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like, you're pure. Here's proof. So the first person who was affected was the heart of Musa alayhi salam by the miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him. Everyone else comes second.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Any reflections, questions, or comments up until about ayah 33 and the purity of his hand? If not, I'm going to continue through. Pharaoh then says to the people around him, and he finally shows a little bit of respect to them. قال للملأ حوله إن هذا لساحر عليم. Pharaoh's like, oh, eminent ones around, like you respected people, my royal court. All this is he's just a learned magician. From the second Moses left here, he's been practicing magic. That's what he's come here to do. And then he continues, يريد أن يخرجكم من أرضكم بسحره. He wants to drive all of you out of your land by his magic. Fir'aun is a master politician here. So he's being hurt. Who's the only one who Musa has said anything against so far? Is Fir'aun. Has Musa said anything about the advisors of Pharaoh? No, of course not, right? But what's Pharaoh saying? He's using the typical politician handbook of fear. What's he going to do? His magic is going to cause you guys to lose your land. You guys are going to be affected by it. فَمَاذَا تَأْمُرُونَ? What do you think we should do? I was just watching a political debate not too long ago, and this is a very typical thing of like politicians will sometimes be like, and your safety and your security is at stake here. This is about the country you want to be. So they'll say something like that. Why? When their political opponent attacked them personally on their own tax record or something like that. They pivot to do what? To try to garner support from the people around them. From their voters. And that's what Pharaoh's doing, because he doesn't have any voters. He just has this like advisors around him, the people who he gets strength through. And what do you advise that we do? قَالُوا أَرْجِهُ وَأَخَاهُ. Stop it. We've lost enough ground today. They said, postpone him, like stall him and his brother. وَابْعَثْ فِي الْمَدَائِنِ حَاشِرِينَ. And let's postpone this for a while, take some time to think about it. We'll go through all of the cities at our disposal and send gatherers amongst them. And why are they doing that? Because what do they need? يَأْتُوكَ بِكُلِّ سَحَّارٍ عَلِيمٍ. We will bring every skilled magician here, because we need all the time and all of the expertise in Egypt in order to contend with what he has just brought. So let's wait, make a big spectacle out of this. فَجُمِعَ السَّحَرَةُ مِيقَاتِ يَوْمٍ مَعْلُومٍ. So the magicians were assembled. So there was a huge search now done. I'm assuming there's like advertising campaigns put out there. Are you a magician? Would you like a big break? Pharaoh is looking like you could just imagine like there's like huge recruiting party of like show your best act because we need only the best acts in order to come defend your nation against this terrorist who's coming to try to upend our way of life. Whatever the case may be, like this huge advertising campaign to find what the best magicians of all of Egypt, of all of the cities of Egypt, of all of the lands, in order to what protect your country, protect your way of life. Is being put forward, and that's what his advisors encouraged him to do. He's doing damage control, and he postpones it to a time. Any questions, comments, reflections? One question I have to ask you is, the way we're going through it right now, was this your understanding of the story of Musa alayhi salam before?
Personally, me, not as much actually. I just glanced over pretty much everything. I never like took my time to like look through each ayah as to like relating to it with our time.
Mm-hmm.
And like, Musa alayhi salam facing anxiety kind of like that when he was talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after he revealed to go to Pharaoh and everything. I never like looked at it from a like my perspective. I just read it from more of like a historical perspective. Maybe that's why I never like got close to it, to the surah, not surah, just him as like a prophet. Like I could never relate to them. I'm like, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using the prophets as like an example for me? Like I'm not gonna throw down a stick and like a serpent will come out of it. Like I could never
Yeah.
relate, but I like this.
Got it. Yeah, and that's one of the cool aspects of the stories in the Quran is they give so much detail in terms of the internal feelings of the characters that you have to wonder, why is that so much attention is given to that? Oh, maybe the lessons are there more than the historicity of kind of what's going on. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. Sarah?
Yeah, I think for me it's like I feel like I learned that like Prophet Musa like he had those miracles, and like I know that he like made that dua for like kind of like to like make his speech good, but I guess I didn't really like see like when I learned his story how he himself like actually did gain confidence, and it wasn't just like, oh, here's the miracles of God like to help you out. Like I didn't really see like hear how he changed like as a person in terms of like being more confident. So
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this a lot as we've been going through this. Is the miracles on the outside are to me as impressive as the miracles on the inside. And what I mean by that is like, yeah, you could say it was such a miracle that like a man did all of this, that he went back to his society and was able to overcome. But like it could be maybe because I'm more aware on this because I work on in a field that's tangentially related to mental health. But like a person who's carrying the guilt of killing someone, who's carrying the guilt of like this weird idea of I'm from the slave race, but I grew up in the palace. For him to go back and have the confidence to lead his people, to face the man who caused oppression to generations of his family, that is as miraculous to me as any stick turning into a snake, as any like to me that is a huge miracle in terms of how an individual could be changed in that way. Isha?
So I basically like missed the entire story because I didn't know the timing of these like classes. But I am aware of the story, and going back to what like Sarah said about like Musa alayhi salam's confidence, like and I remember in like a tafsir class it was mentioned that he made dua specifically like for to gain some confidence because he had a lisp, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped him through like helping him prove these people wrong after the magicians did their tricks and whatever. But yeah, like that's what I wanted to kind of mention.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and definitely that's a component of this. We went over that dua a couple of weeks ago when he said, "Rabbi shrah li sadri waysir li amri, wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani." It's this idea of like, oh Allah, give me confidence, make my task easy for me, and untie the knot that sometimes comes when I speak. So he did ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that help, and you can see the results of that eloquence of he stayed on point, even when Fir'aun tried to trip him up. Guess what? He stayed on point. And when it was a moment to talk, he was able to convince not just uh, communicated the idea to the Fir'aun, but all the observers that heard in that moment as well. So a beautiful kind of uh, situation of how his dua was answered. His dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seems to be directly answered and found in the ayat that come next. For those who missed some of the classes, they are all recorded and on the Facebook page, so feel free to catch up on your own on your own time if you want to. If not, of course, just we welcome you to come every week at 6 p.m. and join us, inshallah, as well.
I have a quick little question again. What's so, like here Musa alayhi salam is depicted as like super confident and like is able to hold his ground pretty much. What's the point of having his brother right next to him? Because in my head, all I'm just like picturing is like Musa alayhi salam and Pharaoh is going back and forth, and him just standing there awkwardly and quiet. What was the point of him?
That's a really good question. That's a really, really good question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described that both of them went to Pharaoh, right? But only saying Musa alayhi salam is speaking. Is it because only Musa alayhi salam is speaking? Maybe. And this is supposed to tell us the value of emotional support. There will be times in which someone will ask you to be by their side and you don't know it, but their eloquence only comes through because you're by them. Like they needed that. So that could be one element. Another is, I sincerely think there are so many narrations of the Prophet ﷺ in hadith literature that talk about the eloquence of Harun, like that he was an eloquent speaker. He was typically the one who Musa would deliver all the messages through. So I could even see this that Allah said that Musa said it, but who was actually delivering it? It could have been Harun. Right? So maybe this was Harun speaking. When it says Musa, it's talking about the party of Musa, which is Musa and Harun. So maybe he was actually speaking. Maybe they were speaking back and forth, like almost like a duet in some way. Or it could just be, I think there is benefit to be said that he was there as support for Musa alayhi salam. Pharaoh has his advisors next to him. It only is right that Musa alayhi salam has his advisor next to him. Because I could also see this. If Musa alayhi salam entered straight into the city and went straight to Pharaoh, you know what Pharaoh could have said? You're telling me all about Bani Israel, but like you don't even know what they're like. You don't even know what, like you're advocating for people you have no relationship with. I actually know my brother's right here. He's been here. So it's this idea also, especially when you're given a task, there's a benefit to the people who are directly affected, who have the most physical experience. They should be a part of the conversation, whether they speak or they don't, but they had the ability of being present and sharing their experience in that way. So I think there's a lot of benefit to Harun being there. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that he's not mentioned, at least in this rendition of it, even though in hadith literature, there's one particular narration that the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Isra and Mi'raj, he saw two shining lights in the Ummah, in all of the prophets. And the two that are mentioned are Dawood alayhi salam and Harun. That these were the two most eloquent of the prophets that came before. So I just find that really interesting. He didn't mention Musa alayhi salam. He mentioned Dawood and Harun. So I just find that to be kind of interesting.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And also the other reason we know that is Musa alayhi salam, even in this very dua, he said, send Harun, he's a much better speaker than I am. So remember, even Musa alayhi salam thinks, I'm not just making, Musa alayhi salam thinks in the Quran that Harun alayhi salam is a much better speaker than he. So it could be him speaking at this time, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the confidence of having a really good speaker behind him that gave him the ability of succeeding in this conversation. So I'm going to conclude with just 2 or 3 more ayat. I thought that we would get to this, but I guess we'll do the magicians next week. وَقِيلَ لِلنَّاسِ هَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُجْتَمِعُونَ. And they're said to the people, will you congregate? This isn't just a search for everyone. They literally did a poll of Egypt. What is the best day for all of you to gather in order to see this giant showdown? لعلنا نتبع السحرة إن كانوا هم الغالبين. That we might follow the magicians if they are predominant. Not if they are, when they are predominant and victorious, right? What's going to happen. So it's like, you're going to see the best show of your life. They're telling everyone to gather. I want us to think for a second here. Pharaoh, because of his arrogance, is actually digging himself in deeper and deeper and deeper. I want you to think about, is there another character in the Quran who, because of his arrogance, digs himself in a much deeper hole than he was in already? Can anyone think of one? Iblis, exactly. Shaitan. Fir'aun is like the Shaitan incarnate, right? Where Iblis could have very well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls him out on his harm, on what he messed up on. Why did you not bow when you were asked to? And instead of admitting, he digs himself deeper to the point of, now he's going to have the sins, not just of that thing that he did, but of misguiding or trying to misguide all of humanity. Pharaoh is doing the same thing. Not that he already didn't have enough reasons to be bad or known as being problematic, but it's just like, you know what? We're gonna make this even bigger. We're gonna call everyone together. He's almost calling a day of judgment. When you think about it, he's saying, let everyone see. Let's make this big. Let's make this huge. This guy insulted me in front of my guards. I will insult him in front of all of Egypt. But this is where I have to logically say, like, arrogance doesn't allow you to think logically. If you got owned in front of your advisors who are on your payroll, who are paid to say nice things about you, what's going to happen when you decide to expand that audience to all of Egypt? You're going to get owned again. That's exactly what's about to take place. But I would just think about like what his arrogance and what his kind of style of rule has done, and it almost necessitated it, to be honest. So I know I'm making fun of it in terms of like how dumb is he to do that, but he's forced his hand, because the only power he has is to prove himself. His reputation is putting other people down. So that's the only toolkit that he has to try to save face. Kind of like the idea of a knife can cut. If you try to get a knife to hammer, it can't do it. A knife can only cut. Pharaoh can only cut. So he's going to try to cut Musa alayhi salam down. We're going to get into I use the term cut very specifically because his threats are always also to just cut. That's all he's able to do. So he doesn't have anything else in his toolbox to use. So he gathers all of them together, and the magicians, which we'll focus on inshallah next week. The psychology of the magicians is actually really, really cool. That sometimes there are people who work within oppressive structures, who are very skillful in a specific task, but they themselves are not evil. They're just being used. And that's what, in my opinion, the magicians really represent in this case. That these are people who are not evil in and of themselves. Because what happens? They're working for Pharaoh, but the second that the truth comes to them, they will work for the truth. Because what? They weren't evil. That wasn't it. They were just very skilled at their art. And as soon as you gave them a better reason, or showed them actual proof, because of their proficiency, they become actually submitters to the truth rather than suppressors of the truth. So we'll see that inshallah case study next week when we're together. We'll go over ayat 40 through maybe 54. Yeah, maybe 54 if we are able to. If not, we'll take our time to get through this. My plan is inshallah to finish the story of Musa alayhi salam by the end of next semester. By this semester, we'll get to Musa alayhi salam leaving Egypt, hopefully. By the end of next semester, we will finish the entire story of Musa alayhi salam as it's found in the Quran, because we do want to catch this rendition of what goes down between Musa alayhi salam and the magicians. There's a different one of it that's found in another place in the Quran, so we're going to hop to that after we finish this one, inshallah. Any last minute reflections or questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I just wanted to say one thing. This is a small comment. You were talking about the politicians using fear to sort of garner support. In my own town, we had a mayoral election, and it was really interesting. Saw like signs up on saying like, if the other person wins, basically saying, if the other person wins, um, they're gonna put affordable housing in the town, and like no to 4,000 homes, and there might maybe there's some sort of specifics to like the affordable housing plan that maybe could be argued about, like if maybe but no one even like questioned it. It wasn't even like a talking point that no one even like, oh, affordable housing, bad, you know. So it's something that when you were talking about the fear, I just remember that.
That's a good connection, and makes you think if that's an argument that works in our own mind of like, I would vote for someone because I'm against that. You have to start being like, oh my gosh, whose side am I on? Am I on Fir'aun's side? That's literally what he said. He's here to kick you out of your home, quote unquote, or make your home less valuable. like, oh gosh, that's a wow, that's an interesting connection, Jisan. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, it was kind of messed up.
Yeah. Isha?
This is unrelated, but I have to head out. If you guys are free at 8, head out to the Palestine 101 by the SGP. It's at Bush at 8 in the Center Hall. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I know you mentioned that like Hazrat Harun alayhi salam was, sort of there for Hazrat Musa for moral support, and I know that his sister was also like a huge she also played a huge role in his like journey. And I just had a question regarding like this is just making a connection to Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like, were the Sahaba also just there for, not just but like there for mainly for moral support, or like was it just so they could maybe gain information or like pass it Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's like legacy on to future generations?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think I can just say is they, of course, they represent, and so do we represent messengers of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in terms of like they have the same responsibility at the end of the day as the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In terms of to carry the message, to really practice and show people the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's a proper way to live, and all of these type of things. But an interesting kind of reflection would be the companions of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to praise the Prophet, Allah does so in two ways. One is to praise the characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the second is to talk about his companions. That the testament to how successful the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the companions, or the quality of the companions and the family of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I think something similar could be said about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends help. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends supporters, and that is a way of kind of being a testament to the work of the Messenger themselves. So Musa is blessed with Harun, is blessed with, and Allah even calls it that way, that like, we've been taking care of you forever. Remember your sister, remember your mother, remember your brother. Like, that these are people who are given to Musa alayhi salam to help him. They are the blessings that are given to Musa alayhi salam in that way. And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam is very similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will praise the companions of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the family of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as kind of a show of, look, you've done well. Look, it's by some special mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, linta lahum, that you were lenient to them, and that they became simahum fi wujuhihim, that you look at their faces and just have joy when you see them. It is this idea that they represent both the joy of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and also a support to him. And I think the same thing could be said about what Harun and the family of Musa alayhi salam represent to Musa alayhi salam. They are his support, but they are also a means of his comfort. They are a means of like proof of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards him. Inshallah, with that, we will conclude. Next week, I will join everyone once again at the same time. And we will continue on with getting a lesson in terms of how the magicians responded and how that's actually a pretty major case study in terms of certain people who don't fall on the good guy spectrum or the bad guy spectrum. And one of the things I'm hoping that we've made very clear here is it's not a binary between good people and bad people. It is qualities that are being referred to here. And just as there are Musas and Fir'auns in everyday life, supporters of Musa alayhi salam, those who are kind of helping him without knowing they're helping him, all of these type of things, these complicated human characters that are found in the story, we're going to find a new breed of that found with the magicians when we interact with them next week, inshallah. With that, we conclude. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those that are able to eloquently speak messages when it's a moment of elegance, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with family and friends who are able to support us in redressing some of the wrongs of the people around us, that when it is our time to confront a Fir'aun, whether it is an external one or an internal one, that we have the courage and ability to do so, that we don't get distracted by our own insecurities or by the bullying tactics of the people in front of us, but we stay onto message. And at the end of the day, praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a result of it instead of praising our own selves. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
I just have one more question regarding like how classes work, because this is like my first time and I was not aware of Silru or like MSA. So do you like, when do the classes generally start, and what are the timings?
Yeah. So I'm going to stop the recording for a second.